Nearly 10 months into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as troops head into their second winter of battle, both sides are vowing to fight on. While Ukrainian President Zelensky is calling on Russian troops to withdraw by Christmas, the Kremlin is calling on Ukraine to, quote, take into account the realities that have developed. Although for the first time since 2013, Putin has canceled his annual year-end news conference, so I guess we won't hear the details of those realities from him. But I'm assuming he means the ones facing millions of Ukrainians worried about being left in the dark without heat or hot water in the coldest months, thanks to his constant attacks on critical civilian infrastructure. Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton was among a group of 5 lawmakers from both parties who recently got a first-hand look at the situation on the ground in Kyiv. Congressman Moulton joins me now. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Good to see you too, Jim.
When you were there about a year ago, you came back and said the U.S. was way behind in doing what it had to do to deter a Russian invasion. Obviously, you were right. How are we doing now, and how are the Ukrainians doing now?
Well, the Ukrainians are doing incredibly well. I mean, nobody expected them to be actually winning this war against Russia, and defeating Putin in his march westward is an incredibly important victory, not just for Ukraine, but for us as well. There's one lesson we should have learned over the last 15 years. It's that Putin's not going to stop. He's going to keep going. We expected him to stop after Georgia, then after Crimea. We can't expect him to stop after Ukraine if he somehow convinces himself that he gets a win here. So he has to be defeated. The Ukrainians are doing that, and it's thanks to our help. Our help's been incredible. And although the administration was slow to act at first, I think they've run this war effort quite brilliantly over most of the last 8 months. My one complaint is they're still just a little bit slow. We talked with the Ukrainians about getting them Patriot missiles, for example. It's taken weeks. The administration finally just
That's
made
about
that
to happen, right? Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that is about to happen, right?
That's right. It's taken too long, Jim, but they are approved, and that will make a big difference in stopping these Russian attacks on critical infrastructure. If Putin's trying to use winter as a weapon, personally, I don't think it's going to work. I think the Ukrainians are far more resilient than he thinks. But it's still going to be a tough winter, and make no mistake, this is an absolutely brutal war.
I want to get back to their resiliency in a minute, but stay on the U.S. support. Other than these Patriot missiles, are there other things we should be doing that we are not? And when I say we, I don't just mean the United States. I mean our Western allies, because it seems to me that President Biden has done a pretty good job of holding them together.
He has done a remarkable job of building this coalition and then keeping it together. And we're doing a lot. Of course, there's always more that we can do. But I think the biggest thing is we've just got to get them aid quickly. One of the things about this war is the Ukrainians' needs change over time. If you remember when it started, it was all about Stinger missiles to keep Russian warplanes out of the sky. Those were successful. Then it was about getting the right kind of artillery to push back the Russian lines. Now it's about Patriot missiles to knock down these Russian cruise missiles. One of the questions I had for the Ukrainians was, what will you need 3 months from now, 6 months from now? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking to make sure we're anticipating their needs and we can ultimately support a Ukrainian victory.
You know, I was about to say to you that it's easy for someone like me who sits on his couch and watches television at night and nod my head and say, I can't believe how brave and relentless the Ukrainian people are. You bring a little more credibility to the table. I'm sure most people know 4 tours of duty in Iraq. But it seems to me that spirit is one thing. Freezing cold winters with, as I said, no hot water, no heat for a ton of people, as Putin is focused on the electric grid, that infrastructure, is pretty tough even for people with great resolve, is it not?
It is. And this is going to be a tough winter for Ukraine. But I tell you, I've just been so impressed by their resiliency, by their resolve. One of the most shocking things to me about visiting the capital this month, exactly a year after I was there, just before the invasion started, is how much it's the same. Kyiv is still a functioning city. You wouldn't know that there's a war going on in the country because the people have so much resolve. It must have been like London during the Great Blitz. When they just refused to be cowed by Hitler. And in fact, I'll take the opportunity to say there are a lot of comparisons being made in Ukraine today between Putin and Hitler. I think that's how Putin is going to go down in history.
You know, Seth Moulton, can we talk about our resolve? Your Republican colleagues in the House who are about to take control are less enthusiastic, it seems to me, about full support, and so are the American people. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this poll. Let me put it up. The Quincy Institute poll from September, likely U.S. voters. Do you support the U.S. pursuing negotiations to end the war, even if Ukraine would have to make some compromise? 57 to 32. And you know as well as I, we all heard the incredible First Lady of Ukraine on 60 Minutes saying no compromise at this point. Her husband, the president, saying no compromise. That 57 to 32 sounds to me like a people, American people, who are losing their resolve. Do you disagree with that?
Well, I think that we probably need to do a better job of helping people understand the consequences of Russia somehow getting a win out of this war.
What are they?
That they'll go somewhere next. And the next places that they'll go are NATO allies, because that's what borders Ukraine. And if they're attacking NATO allies like Poland, where we flew into in order to take an overnight train to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, if they attack Poland, U.S. troops will be involved in that fight. Americans will die. So the investment that we're making in this war now will ultimately save dollars and save lives, American dollars, lives down the road.
Yeah, but it seems to me you don't only have to make, we not only have to, don't have to make the case to the American people. As I said, the Republican leadership appears to be not wildly enthusiastic about this level of support. Even your colleagues, the Progressive Caucus, put out that letter, which they withdrew, the Democrats, in about a nanosecond, talking about negotiating directly, the United States negotiating directly with the Russians. So it seems to me, before we worry about educating the American people, a lot of educating of your colleagues on both sides of the aisle needs to go on.
You're right, Jim, honestly. There's education that needs to go on in Congress. But it's important to understand that the vast majority of Congress, the vast majority of Republicans and Democrats support Ukraine, support them getting a victory out of this war. It's the far left and the far right, really the fringes of both parties, that are the problem here. And the progressives were very quick to withdraw that letter on the left. On the right, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're doubling down. I don't think the issue is that Republican leadership really wants to listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene, but the political reality is that they are. And that's the concern that I have. Not that someone like Kevin McCarthy, if he becomes speaker, really wants to stop aid to Ukraine, but that he might be cowed by the far right in his party to do their bidding. And they, of course, are opposed. So we do have some work to do in Congress, but the vast majority of Congress is with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people.
You know, Seth Moulton, every single person who has some expertise in this part of the world has said to me, of all political stripes, this only ends when Putin ends. Do you feel any differently?
I think there's probably some truth to that. I can't predict the future, but one of the most pressing questions that we're all asking is exactly how does this end? You know, what does it look like when this is all over? What does defeat for Russia actually look like on the ground? The reality right now is that neither side is in a position to negotiate because there's no overlap between their negotiating positions. So Ukraine rightly says they want their country back. I don't think that if Putin were invading America, we would settle for just giving up the East Coast or just giving up California in some negotiated settlement. Ukraine wants their whole country back, and they deserve it. Of course, Putin, on the other hand, is wildly delusional about what he thinks he's going to get out of Ukraine. I think the way to get to a point where you could actually have a negotiation to end this war is to press Ukraine further on victory, to have the Ukrainians take more territory of their own back from Russia, to put Russia in a more reasonable negotiating position.
Can we move from Ukraine to Afghanistan? We made promises, we as a country, to those who helped us in Afghanistan when we were there. My understanding is there are tens of thousands. I think most recently I saw 73,000 people after we withdrew who came to this country who incredibly, to me, are at risk of deportation back to a country where I assume, should it happen, they're facing near certain death. Can you describe the current situation and what's going on?
I mean, you're telling the story exactly right, Jim, and it's despicable. We left a lot of Afghans behind. There are a lot of Afghans, tens of thousands, that we promised to save, who are still in Afghanistan trying to get out. So that should be the first priority, is to get them before the Taliban gets them. But unbelievably, even the ones who we did get to safety here in America are now facing getting sent back to Afghanistan because the Republicans in Congress are blocking the effort that's bipartisan among veterans to give them their rightful future in America. This is breaking a promise that all of us who fought in these wars made to our allies, to our friends who put their lives on the line, not just for Afghanistan or Iraq, but for us too. And because we're breaking that promise that we made, it honestly feels like a real betrayal. I mean, I think for veterans like myself, it feels like we're betraying our Afghan allies because our own government is betraying us.
Well, I would go further, Congressman. I would say we're not only betraying our Afghan allies, but we're betraying people like you in the future who choose to fight on behalf of this country, because I'm assuming that that interpreter, that aide in 3 years in some other combat zone is going to be less likely to put his or her family at risk by helping us when they know that the country they help is unlikely to honor our commitment to them. Yes?
That's exactly right. So we veterans feel like we're letting our allies down. We feel like we're being betrayed by today's U.S. government. But future servicemen and women in conflicts that we don't know yet, they're going to have to find friends and allies too. And it's going to be really hard when they go out and say, we saw what happened. We saw what happened in Afghanistan when you promised to save your allies. You don't uphold that promise, so we're not going to work with you. And that will cost American lives.
You know, I have to say I don't understand this. My understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, is the National Defense Authorization usually includes these extension of visas in these kind of circumstances. What is the public argument or private argument amongst the Republicans for not honoring our commitment to those who honored their commitment to us?
Their argument is that they just don't like immigration. They don't like Afghans moving to America. And the chief of this argument is Chuck Grassley, Senator Grassley of Iowa, who is anti-immigrant. He's not a veteran, so he doesn't understand what it means to be in a situation where you promise someone with your life. They're putting their life in your hands, you're putting your life in theirs, and you will have their back. He doesn't understand that. And frankly, Jim, I think it's rooted in racism. I think that's what's going on here. And it's just such a shame that a few racist Republicans are breaking the promises that thousands of American veterans made to our friends.
Are you confident that some version of this, whether it's tied to the defense authorization or not, is going to pass in time to protect those who are here, to at least extend their stay?
I'm honestly not.
Not?
And I'm doing everything I can with my fellow veterans. Again, on both sides of the aisle, Republican veterans are with us too here. We're doing everything we can. But to be honest, right now it looks pretty bleak.
Can we end on something that's a bleak situation where I think there's a little bit of good news and you're involved? Could you describe to people what this 988 lifeline is, hotline is, and how it's working since it went into place, I think, earlier this summer?
So this is a bill I passed a couple years ago with a fellow veteran, a Republican on the other side of the aisle, to establish a 3-digit nationwide mental health hotline to work just like 911. Yeah. You wake up in the middle of the night and your house is on fire, you dial 911. Now everyone will know that if you wake up and you or a loved one has a mental health emergency, you can call 988. Since it went into effect this July, calls to the service have gone up over 40%. And something like over 80% are calls where a life is saved just by talking to someone. So this is saving thousands of lives a month. Jim, I think it's honestly the most meaningful thing that I've done thus far in Congress. And, you know, it's making a difference. It's making a difference in people's lives because they know a number to call. And I think it's also just normalizing the conversation about mental health. So I appreciate you bringing it up, and I appreciate every opportunity I get to just talk about it so people know 988 is out there if you need it.
And to be clear, a lot of the people who are making those calls and whose lives are being saved are fellow veterans of yours, no?
There's a good number that are fellow veterans, and there's a real effort made if you call 988 to get directed to someone who understands your particular needs. So if you're a veteran, you'll be directed to an existing veterans crisis line to talk with someone who understands your particular situation as best as possible. But it doesn't, whether you're a veteran or you're someone who's just going through trauma, I think every one of us experiences trauma in some form in our lives, and you deserve to get help. If you sprain your ankle, you deserve to get help. If you have a mental injury, you deserve to get help too. So call 988 if you need it.
Terrific. Congressman, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Be well.
It's great to see you, Jim, and we're going to miss you. So thank you. It's an honor to be back on the show, and I'll miss coming on with you.
Tune into the radio. I'll be there, Seth Moulton. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah.